nhờ mà cứ các cái bờ mà cho nên là uai oi từ ở về mà cứ các cái gì từ nên hai từ ơi mà là từ nó main này vì thế họ quỳ van nó từ
And naturally, having moved away through a process of industrialization, we killed our gods. Nietzsche, most famously, God is dead, which means that assumptions about ancestors living in clouds and souls moving across unstandardized dimensions beyond the verifiable senses were discarded as well. And so, in place of God came science, to hold these tumultuous experiences within a framework of theoretical commonality. The social representation of these ideals held across our belief systems, and so the conviction remains as the truth, higher case T. Let's give an example. Robert must have had untreated dementia for taking his own life, dopamine and serotonin depletions in his brain, as well as a lack of coping procedures to siphon off the biochemical threshold, which already placed him at risk due to his poor physical health, lower SES status, racial ethnic category, history of mental illness in the family, and environmental rigidity. So, instead of the chaplain, or the imam, or another spiritual leader, comes a psychologist, a counselor, a mental health professional, to instantiate a narrative which coalesces the truth, the collective representation of the truth, propped up by our worldview, which is scientific principles, as it fits for poor old Robert who took his own life. It makes sense insofar as we collectively agree that these convictions are the normal injunctions of the world as we see it. But does this worldview of truth universalize to all other mental permutations? I can use my grandmother as an example, my Nani. She doesn't have any sort of formal education and is not familiar with a Western worldview, as she doesn't even speak English. If my Nani were to hear that her grandson took his own life, and she was presented with an fMRI brain scan looking at the lack of gray matter in my corpus callosum, or whatever, something along the lines of what I said for Robert, it would produce only more tribulation and unsteadiness into what she should have offered to her. The scientist, the psychologist, the mental health professional would have to be removed from the room, and the imam, the chaplain, the soul interpreter would have to be brought in. Your son, or we can say Robert, had demons within him that were reducing his ability to communicate with God, and he tried to hold on to the light for as long as he could, but eventually he had to let go, or else Shaitan, the devil, would have made him do something even worse. A different answer, an answer held within the purview of our Western world or any empirical analysis, would be laughed at. It would be inadmissible or abjectly thrown out as nonsensical drivel. But if at an abstract level, and now think about Karl Popper's three-world theory, if at an abstract level the world of gods and spirits and demons and ancestors living in these unstandardized dimensions presents itself as a conviction, as a reality, then it enters into the social milieu, not just as a common language which tethers individuals to a socio-cultural fabric, but a higher order answer than the one presented before it. Durkheim notes this extensively, as such when he says, "The worshipper who has communed with his God is not only a man who sees new truths that the unbeliever does not know. He is a man who is capable of more. He feels strength in himself, either to cope with the difficulties of existence or to defeat them. He is raised above human miseries because he is raised above his conditions as a man. He believes he is saved from evil in whatever form he conceives of evil." So the logical, rationalistic answer may help us make sense of the technical details of the situation, someone taking his own life. But without that spiritual accountability, that moral injunction, we won't heal ourselves, which is why that dimension, that metaphysical dimension of psychology, as it relates to clinical applications, right? Because we're not just neurobiologists or chemists studying human behaviors in a research laboratory. We deal and interact with people suffering. So extrapolating that statement of abstraction, third world abstractions entering the lens in which we see the world, right, which is called solipsism in philosophy, Richard Katz highlights the Hearing Voices movement, which is an indigenous-led movement which seeks to delabel, decolonize how we view schizophrenia, right? Hallucinatory experiences which need to be medicalized, as something far much greater, which is people hearing voices as a way for increased understanding and growth.
For he must respect the word of the evils. That is the law. And no Spartan, subject or citizen, man or woman, slave or king, is above the law.
Shifting the stance from mental illness towards different mental capabilities and worldviews, which can be used with ingenuity and social commonality, that's very important, to benefit our world. So here I'm highlighting an article titled "Muslim Tradition Healers in Accra, Ghana, Beliefs About and Treatment of Mental Disorders," to further illustrate this point, the truth with a lowercase t when it comes to psychological realities. So the researchers used an experiential qualitative design to answer the question, how do Muslim healers in Accra understand and treat mental disorders? And what they found was each healer had a spiritual basis for the person suffering, either that they were possessed by a jinn, or nazar, which means black magic, or even delving into their dreams to look at what images have been presenting to them.
Now in a dream, our mind continuously does this. We create and perceive our world simultaneously, and our mind does this so well that we don't even know what's happening. That allows us to get right in the middle of that process.
How?
By taking over the creating part. Now this is where I need you. You create the world of the dream.
The term schizophrenic is never employed in that culture, not solely due to the difference in lexicon, but because of the enforced ideals which still permeate in indigenous societies, like in Ghana, West Africa, which have yet to be tethered from their gods, spirits, ancestry, and collective functioning, right? So the psyche of an indigenous person is much different from our psyche, right? Through a process of Western education, our generation is amongst the least religious in recorded history, right? That's because we can't reconcile what we've been taught through our education system, which relegates truth as it fits with scientific principles with more metaphysical applications, right? And I've talked about that at length as well.